It's great to be here today. I'm president of the National Civic Arts Society, a nonprofit organization founded in 2002. We begin with the premise that a civilization's most important architecture is its civic art and architecture, since these structures express and inculcate ideas and values. The National Civic Arts Society's mission is to educate and empower leaders in the promotion of public art and architecture worthy of our great republic. We do this by advancing the classical tradition. My talk is on the American architect as nation builder. It's a huge subject, and my time is very limited, so I'll only be able to sketch a part of the picture. I'm going to focus on federal government buildings, given these are the most explicit embodiment of our national values, but there's also much to be said about the influence of colonial revival architecture on the American psyche, particularly at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, and also from 1910 to 1930. And then, of course, one cannot talk about the American ethos without mentioning that uniquely American invention, the skyscraper, which at its best is a cathedral of commerce, at its worst, a steel and glass cage, a housing project for businessmen. Going back to the Parthenon in ancient Athens, built by Pericles, it has long been recognized that architecture has immense impact on the body politic. The English architect Sir Christopher Wren said in 1666, "Architecture has its political use, public buildings being the ornament of a country. It establishes a nation, draws people and commerce, makes the people love their country. Architecture aims at eternity." The founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson above all, aimed to use architecture to establish their nation at the same time that the nation was being established. Jefferson wrote to Pierre L'Enfant, who was planning the new Capitol, quote, "Whenever it is proposed to prepare plans for the Capitol building, I should prefer the adoption of some one of the models of antiquity which have had the approbation of thousands of years." Likewise, George Washington, who was also an amateur architect, praised the design of the Capitol building for its, quote, "grandeur, simplicity, and beauty." This is the original drawing for the Capitol, and of course, this is how it is today. Both men consciously decided on classical architecture for the core buildings of government, wishing to harken back to democratic antecedents in ancient Greece and Rome. Indeed, some years prior, in the 1780s, Jefferson, who was a genius amateur architect, had designed the Virginia Capitol in Richmond based on the Maison Carrée, an ancient Roman temple in Nîmes, France. The Virginia Capitol was the first American building constructed in a pure classical temple form. Highly innovative for its time, in its Romanism, the Capitol was the first public building in America to reject the English colonial tradition in architecture, thus representing a kind of cultural independence based in free will. Jefferson hoped that his new State House would inspire the construction of other classical buildings in the country. Later, Washington and Jefferson oversaw the competitions for and had a direct hand in the designs of the White House and Capitol. Jefferson called the latter, quote, "the first temple dedicated to the sovereignty of the people, embellishing with Athenian taste the course of a nation looking far beyond the range of Athenian destinies." Thanks to the founding generation, neoclassicism was the physical manifestation of the American form of government and its political aspirations, including such values as good order, benevolent hierarchy, and reason. The founders inaugurated a national idiom using the traditional vocabulary and grammar from the classical world. The White House and Capitol, the National Mall, and the plan for the entire city of Washington, they are universally recognized symbols of the United States that we take pride in. The Capitol building itself would be the model for the vast majority of state Capitol buildings. And official classicism would last in the federal government until well into the FDR administration. In the decades following the founding of Washington, the architect who led American architecture was Benjamin Henry Latrobe. A second important architect following him, I'm sorry, I'll get to him in a second. Latrobe was the second designer of the U.S. Capitol who President Jefferson assigned to the post of surveyor of public buildings. Continuing the classical tradition begun by the founders, Latrobe designed the aesthetically important Bank of Pennsylvania, a temple-type building that has been called the first monument of Greek revival in America, though technically it was a neoclassical synthesis of Greek and Roman forms. Built of marble, it must have looked stunning next to all of the brick buildings surrounding it. Greek revival is a highly rational form of classicism based on the Greek Doric order, though this is actually Ionic. It was said that its severity and geometrical simplicity suited the puritanical nature of the country. Later, Latrobe would design the Second Bank of the United States, a building that attracted international attention. Although based on the Parthenon, it was not a monument, but a practical building. It was far ahead of anything being constructed in Europe in its use of classicism for ordinary purposes. It helped establish the use of the temple form in America for all kinds of buildings, including homes. So this is an example of a relatively humble Greek revival house. Indeed, the Greek revival became and remained the national style until the mid-19th century. This is an example of one of those buildings in DC, the Patent Office by Robert Mills. Jefferson's dream for classical American architecture had come true, stirred in part by the Greek War of Independence against the Ottoman Empire, a war that began in 1821 and which reminded Americans of their own struggle for freedom. The idea and ideals of Greece weighed heavily on the American mind. The sculptor Horatio Greenough wrote in 1843, "As a Christian preacher may give weight to truth by studying the models of pagan writers, so the American builder will learn of the Greeks to be American." In the mid-19th century, Greek revival would be replaced by eclecticism in an era that has sometimes been called the Dark Age of American architecture, perhaps indicating that this is one of the buildings at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. But classicism would return and be invigorated in 1893 with the World's Columbia Exposition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair. Commemorating the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's discovery of the Americas, the exhibition was a collection of enormous temporary buildings with a common classical vocabulary, arranged on a grand plan. The architecture was inspired by ancient precedents, but also those from the Renaissance and more recent French design. The sumptuous Beaux-Arts style was actually more ornamental than the chaste classicism from Greco-Roman antiquity, but it was never doubted for its authenticity. At the heart of the fair, which was orchestrated by the architect Daniel Burnham, was the Court of Honor, incorporating vistas punctuated by symmetry, eye-catching monuments, axial avenues, uniform cornice heights, scenic waterways, and harmonious ensembles of buildings. The sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens said it was the greatest meeting of artists since the 15th century. The so-called White City had a tremendous emotional and intellectual impact in America. Millions of people attended. The phrase, "Thine alabaster cities gleam," in the song America the Beautiful, was inspired by the exhibition. Landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted had feared that the architect's decision to make their fair buildings perfectly white would create a blinding effect. Yet the whiteness of the fair shortly became an important symbol of purity and freshness in the moral crusade against what was seen as the dark ugliness of American cities, both literally and metaphorically. The fair shone all the more brightly at night thanks to the new technology of illumination. The exhibition changed American architecture and planning. The classical once again became the correct style for American political values. The exhibition helped engender the City Beautiful movement, a period in which it was thought that the design of cities, including monumental architecture, public art, and planning could encourage civic virtue, including the virtue of the common man. The White City heralded a new epoch. What was not noted at the time, but can be understood in retrospect, was that it was a full-scale city of the kind that Pierre L'Enfant envisioned for Washington, D.C. in his incredibly ambitious plan for the district in 1791, which the district was at the time largely vacant land. The first and foremost example of the City Beautiful movement is the 1901-1902 plan for Washington, D.C., known as the McMillan Plan, named after the senator who instigated and oversaw it. The McMillan Plan restored and extended L'Enfant's rational, orderly design for the city by creating the National Mall and the surrounding monumental core as we know it. Indeed, the McMillan Plan is arguably the greatest work of civic art in the modern era. It is significant that the mall as we know it is only just over 100 years old, since it appears to have been there forever, the eternal heart of an eternal republic. It's hard to imagine, but at the turn of the 20th century, there was no breathtaking vista from the Capitol to the Potomac, no graceful boulevard of trees and paths lined with noble edifices, but instead a shabby rambling park anchored at one end by a sooty train station in front of the Capitol building and at the other end by a malarial swamp. This is an image showing what Washington looked like in 1885. You can see the stump of the Washington Monument towards the bottom left. Under the McMillan Plan, government buildings designed to complement the neoclassicism of Jefferson's and L'Enfant's era were to line the mall and encircle Capitol Hill. In an amazing feat of continuity and perseverance, the McMillan Plan slowly but surely steered the design of Washington for decades, and it is still having an impact on development today. The Lincoln Memorial, well, everyone knows what that looks like. The Lincoln Memorial reached completion in 1922, an innovative Greek-inspired temple with the brooding statue of Lincoln where Zeus would have been in the ancient world. The McMillan Plan also created the Federal Triangle, including the National Archives and the National Gallery of Art, all of them classical, all of them beautiful, to state the obvious. Perhaps the last structure to be built as envisioned by the McMillan Plan is the U.S. Supreme Court, another temple design built in the quote-unquote modern era. The building was completed in 1936. Until its completion, the court met in a chamber at the Capitol building. The new Supreme Court's building, Cass Gilbert, was a political conservative who had a lifelong love for ancient Greek culture as a result of reading Plato and Socrates as a young man. Gilbert eloquently described the underlying motivation of his architectural work. Quote, "It is an inspiration toward patriotism and good citizenship. It encourages just pride in the state and is an education to oncoming generations to see these things, imponderable elements of life and character, set before the people for their enjoyment and betterment. It is a symbol of the civilization, culture, and ideals of our country." It was Gilbert himself who was responsible for the phrase above the entrance to the Supreme Court, "Equal justice under law." Those words have become a famous tagline for the court, but it was the idea of the architect, a true nation builder. It is hard to imagine a modernist architect today having such a beneficent impact on the nation. Gilbert's Supreme Court reflected and reinforced the consensus understanding of the court as a co-equal branch of government. The building is beloved and respected by Americans and justices of all interpretive persuasions. As an edifice of the law should be, it is quite literally based on majestic ancient precedent. Thank you.